Hi, this is Dave Straley. This is a continuation of the video that we're putting together for Beach Crew Alumni Association and for Long Beach State to document the history of early crew, or document the history of crew. We're interviewing former rowers for looking to discuss sort of three characteristics. One is camaraderie, stories about camaraderie. Two is dedication, to hear about what they endured and what they did to get to where they were. And three is achievements. And today, I'm honored to be with Karen McCloskey-Keehn, who, among her achievements, was the 1976 Olympic rower on the stroking the quad in the first Olympics that women were. In 1976 was the first time that women rowed in the Olympics, and she was part of the Long Beach Women's Mafia, should we say, or or dedicated women rowers from Long Beach.
Or crazy people.
They're crazy people. No, we're not crazy. All right, so let's start. How did you get into rowing?
Well, when I graduated from high school in Tustin, California, nobody from my class, which was a very large class, but nobody was going to Long Beach. And so I thought I should go and make some friends. And so Long Beach had an organizations fair out in the middle of the quad for all of the clubs to have representatives to try to get people to join. And I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to meet some new people, get into some clubs and stuff. And there were lots of different clubs, and the crew was out there recruiting, and they had an 8, and they had a bunch of the guys from the crew looking very tall and studly and handsome. And they also had Shell and Oar, and Shell and Oar at that time was the women's auxiliary to the crew. They didn't row because there was no women's rowing program at Long Beach, but they were the hangers-on and the supporters of the guys, and they had a sign that said, "Meet 50 handsome men." I saw the guys after I saw the sign, and I thought, I don't know what this is, but sign me up. So I signed up, not quite realizing what was going to happen because of it. So my initial reason I got into crew was because I was looking for tall men. Shell and Oar, through Shell and Oar, the guys, I think to get a good laugh, would take us out in the old barge, and they taught us how to row. And rowing was not something that was foreign to me. When I was very young, it's kind of weird, but when I was very young, probably 7 or 8, we had a swimming pool in our backyard in Southern California. I lived in Sherman Oaks in the San Fernando Valley. And we had a 6-foot fiberglass rowboat. And we would play with it in the pool. We'd sink it, we'd tip it and sink it. But at other times, I would sit in that boat and I would put the oar locks in it and I would just row back and forth. I loved the feeling of doing that. And I think my mom thought that I'd lost it a little bit, but it was just a feeling I really, really loved. And so getting into the barge was like, ooh, this is sort of like coming home. I know this feeling. I know what this feels like. And a group of us were sitting after one of the barge sessions, probably in February of 1970, and a young woman named Melinda Collis approached us and told us that she was new to the area. She had just moved there from back east, and she was looking for friends, and would any of us like to learn how to kayak, because she had been primarily a kayaker. And I said, sure, because at that point I was up for anything. And she said, well, it's really kind of too cold. The water's too cold right now to kayak, but I could teach you how to scull. And so she taught me how to scull, and she and I would go out in wherries and there was, at that point, one other woman who was also rowing, and it all had to be through Long Beach Rowing Association because Cal State didn't have a program.
Female,
yeah,
right.
And so Carol Simpson was the first female member of Long Beach Rowing Association. Melinda Collis was the second, and I became the third. Joan Van Blum, who was Joan Lind at the time, became the fourth. And so we were the first 4 females to join. And that was spring of 1970. And Carol and Melinda and I rowed together in various combinations. And a gentleman from Long Beach Rowing Association, who I wish I could remember his name so that I could thank him.
Newman?
It wasn't. It
Okay.
wasn't Paul. It was... I can see his face, but I cannot remember his name. But he sort of jokingly suggested, hey, Nationals are going to be in Oakland this year. Why don't we put a team together and go? So this was probably March or April,
Okay.
and Nationals were in June. And so we sort of trained and went up to Nationals, and I got a bronze in the wherry. I don't know that we got anything else. We might have. Melinda and Carol may have rowed in a double, but I was such a rookie that...
So you were third in the U.S.
Third in the U.S.
as
after
4 months of...
4 months of rowing, and that probably is a testimony to the level of women's rowing at that point, more than a testimony to any strength that I had. Women's rowing was pretty sad.
In a wherry was, at the time, was a single wider boat.
Yeah, a big tub, a big fiberglass
big
tub.
Yeah, and it was fiberglass at that time.
Yeah, they were.
Right. Okay.
So,
Heavy and slow.
yeah. And so we came back from Nationals being all excited, and we heard rumors that Tom McKibben, who had just won world championships in '69 with John Van Blum, that Tom was interested maybe in coaching us. And this was all rumors around the boathouse. And so Melinda and I approached him and said, all right, this is what we've heard. Is it true? And I can still picture him. He was sitting back someplace, looking cool. And he said, well, I might be interested in coaching you. But you have to understand, I'm going to train you twice as hard as the men, and I want no crying. And Melinda and I looked at each other and thought, you've got it. And thus it began. And shortly after that, Joan joined us, and Tom was true to his word and trained us like crazy.
Now, trains like crazy. Let's go over. This is in the era before heart rate monitors, Gatorade, nutritional supplements. This is
videotaping.
Videotape. Yeah, video cameras did not exist. It was a Super 8 actually, with film.
We didn't get filmed.
So you're back with Tom. He says you're going to work twice as hard as the men. What would have been an average week in terms of rowing?
Okay.
Once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day. 3 times a day, okay?
3 times a day. When we were training for races, in the fall we would go long distances.
Okay,
We would go around and around and around and around and around the island, or we would all and around and around.
3 miles around, it was about 3 miles around the island, if I remember correctly.
It's 4,000 meters.
Okay.
And then sometimes we would all get in wherries and we'd row out to the Queen Mary.
Oh, wow, okay, all right.
And back.
So
and
this was long, slow distance.
Okay. And never stopping and going and going and going and running and riding bicycles. And he introduced us to the Long Beach State weight room. We were the first females, Joan and I. By that time, Carol had moved back to the Bay Area, and this is getting into 71, spring of 71 probably. And Melinda went off to get married to a gentleman back east. actually the captain of the Harvard crew. And so it was pretty much just Joan and myself. And we went into the Long Beach State weight room. And at first, the guys laughed at us because women did not go in and lift weights back then. It just did not happen. We were the very first ones. And then when they saw that we were leg pressing 440 pounds and saw the workouts that we were doing, Tom would have us do our body weight plus 40 pounds and simulate a race on
in leg presses.
With leg presses.
This is before erg machines. There are no rowing machines, so you're in the weight room. Yes.
Yeah, and we would also run Hill Street in Signal Hill, which is so steep a hill that bicycles are not allowed down it. They have a Model T hill climb there every May to see Model Ts if they can get up the hill. And it's about a quarter mile long, and we would race that and sometimes go all the way to the top, which would make it about half a mile. But that was a workout that was so horrific that we would sit in class anticipating it and start to sweat. Just, I think Tom had us do it as much for our heads as for our bodies.
Okay.
Because we knew that if we could survive running the hill, we could survive anything. So we could learn to push ourselves harder and harder and harder. A typical week would be 3 workouts a day, Monday through Friday, and then 2 workouts on Saturday. Mornings were sprints. We would typically do maybe 6 500s at that point. Now I'm sure they do more, but back then we were doing 6, and that was a lot, and with very little rest. And then he'd have us go around the island a couple of times. There were variations. Noontime, we would either lift weights or run the hill. Weights were 3 days a week, and the hill was 2 days a week. And then afternoons were technique. And we'd go back in the back channel, and we would just work on making our oars absolutely flawless, going over the water and into the water so that we made just the right sound going into the water, because he was a firm believer that perfect technique makes you faster. And so we looked, our technique was flawless.
Right. I can confirm that also. Tom spent a lot of hours with our boat, the varsity boat in '70, on technique in the back channel.
Yeah.
Now, when you rowed out to the Queen Mary and we're doing it around the island, is Tom rowing also, or is he in a?
No, he was in
a follow boat.
I think it was Boston Whaler.
Boston Whaler, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It was before the cool kind of boats that the coaches have now.
No. Okay. Good. Anybody in your family have had a rowing background or an athletic
background? No rowing. My dad was California State saber champion. He was a fencer.
Oh, all right.
And I was actually on the fencing team at Long Beach State for a while.
Okay.
But again, back then, women could only compete with foil, which requires really fast twitch muscles. It's one of those where you're there and it's boom, and you're done in a second. And it's just such quick reflexes, and I just wasn't good at it. And I was rowing at the time, and I was on the fencing team, and I knew that rowing was going to have much more of a potential for a future for me than fencing.
And you're carrying a full load.
Oh, yeah.
You have a student load.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. And working.
Okay. And working also.
Yeah.
Okay.
I worked for the Seal Beach Parks and Rec as I taught gymnastics.
Wow.
Part-time.
So you were juggling work, school, and 2 sports.
And I graduated with honors.
Outstanding. Excellent.
So, yeah.
Achievements. That's why we're here.
So My dad was disappointed when I quit the fencing team until the rowing started really getting better. In '71, Joan and I narrowly missed making the national team. We were given, it was in Old Lyme, Connecticut, which was gorgeous. It was so green and lush and beautiful. But we were given an old, heavy, terrible Pocock double.
Double? Okay.
And Tom tried so hard to get us a different boat, but this thing weighed like as much as the Queen Mary, and it was just huge. And on top of that, I came down with the measles the day of the race. I kept wondering why I had these lumps in the back of my neck, and I knew I'd been exposed. One of my dorm mates had them, and I remember telling her, the timing is just right that I would get these at nationals. If I get these, you're going to hear from me. But I almost passed out in the race, and the other team won. And I always thought that it was because I was sick. The next day I broke out in the rash. But I found out later, Tom sort of kept it secret from us because he didn't want us to worry about having such a lousy boat. But he said, no, it was a setup. They gave you guys a terrible boat. So. And
this is, we touched upon in an earlier interview with the Van Blums, East Coast, West Coast sort of rivalry or distinction. And
we were very definitely looked down upon
by
the East Coast.
And the club that gave you this heavier boat was...
I'm not sure where the boat came from, okay. But I know that the gal who beat us, the gal who stroked the boat who beat us, the boat was from Vesper, okay. Which is Philadelphia, and they definitely thought these California upstarts were not any good.
Not worthy.
And I don't know that it was deliberate.
Right.
I don't know that they had any reason to be worried about us, but that was '71. And then in '72, by the time '72 came along, our team had grown significantly.
So now there's not just you and Joan.
I remember everybody who was there. But there were a lot more women, and we had a full complex. And we were well trained by that point, and we won everything, and we set national records in the double and the quad. It was in Seattle, and we even jumped into an 8, just sort of as a lark, and we won that too.
Wow.
And oh my goodness, those sweep rowers were so mad at us because they were like, you guys are scullers, you're not supposed to be doing sweep rowing. And we were good at it because we were so well trained and we had such good technique that we could just carry it over. That was fun. That was really fun.
All right, so that was '72.
Yeah.
All right.
That was the year I turned 21. My
Outstanding.
21st birthday was during Nationals.
Nationals, okay. After that, 70 to get us to '76.
Well, '72 we went to European Championships.
Okay.
And it was just the women, so it was really the Women's World Championships, but they were in Brandenburg, East Germany. And we went to a little town called Ratzeburg, which is on an island.
We got to stop a second. That's East Germany. The wall is not.
Well, it was next to East Germany.
All right.
Brandenburg was East Germany.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and there was the wall, and there were guards, and it was scary. I've got a great story about that too. Whew. But we trained right on the east-west border. Ratzeburg was right on the border, and there were barbed wire fences and guard towers and stuff right there, right on the lake. So it was a constant reminder. But we trained there, and then we took a train to go to Brandenburg, East Germany. And when we crossed the border, number one, there was hardly anybody on the train because really who'd want to go to East Germany?
Right.
But they stopped, and this is a deserted train station, and all these soldiers came out with guns, and a lot of them had dogs, and they're sniffing all around underneath the train and around the train, and the guys are coming through going, visas, visas! They wanted our visas, and we had none. We were told we would get our credentials at the border. And so they pulled us off the train into this deserted train station, and we sat there, and as the train pulled out, I can remember they had windows on one side. It was like the compartments were on one side and then an aisle, and then there were windows. And these people were like looking at us as they went off in the train, and we're standing there going, oh my goodness, what's going on? We ended up staying there for a couple of hours while they were trying to contact the FISA rowing officials to see if we were okay. But the problem was that all of our credentials were in French, and none of these East Germans spoke French, and so it took a while to work everything out. But it did, and we went on. But walking into East Germany in 1972 was like walking into a black and white World War II movie. The difference from West Germany was so dramatic. It was unbelievable. The food was terrible. The rowing conditions were fine, but we didn't do very well. We did okay. But while we were in Ratzeburg, we also were in Hamburg for a while, and we were in a quad race in Hamburg and won it. And that was the first time that American women ever had won an international race.
Wow.
And I have the little, it's like a little dish that they gave us that I think I'm going to send to the Rowing Hall of Fame.
That's good.
Clean it up and give it to them. But that was the first. And we didn't realize that we were making history. We didn't realize that we were doing anything unusual. We were just going and rowing. So we rowed in East Germany. And then we came out, and that was 1972. And John Van Blum and Tom McKibben were in the double in Munich at the Olympics.
That's correct, yes.
And we had another coach for us. And so we went down to see if we could watch them row, and the security was very, very lax. And we could just take a bus out to the rowing area, hop the fence, and get out to where we needed to be. And we were kind of waiting at the gate for Tom and John after their race. And we were wearing our U.S. sweats, and some men came out in suits and said, "Oh, you American women? Yeah, we just competed on the national team." And they said, "Well, you must be really excited." And we thought, okay, I'll buy it. Why? Well, women's rowing has just been added as an Olympic sport for 1976. And it was like, okay, 4 more years of training.
We're in.
And we're in, and here we go. The ride gets more exciting.
Now, how many of you were there then? When they had topped the fence, so there was you and Joan?
And you know what? I think Carol Simpson had come back with us.
Okay.
And I cannot remember the fourth person.
Okay.
I feel terrible that I can't remember the fourth person. But yeah, that's where we were. And so then the real journey began, and the real hard training began.
With Tom, too.
With Tom. And Tom was on board 100%. He raced in a few more races, but pretty much he retired after that, and just coached us.
Okay. Tom was a little older than us.
Yeah.
You and I are in the same age group, and Tom was 5 to 6, 7, maybe even more.
I'm trying to think. I'm guessing he may be 10 years older.
Yeah, that's probably correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So it was, we had, when Tom was training them, it's not only, one, this explains why he finished his career in rowing. He was in his early 30s, probably earlier mid-30s when he did that. And two, you had a lot of rowing coaches are people that rowed varsity, and the next year they're a coach. And Tom, was far
He
beyond
rowed
that.
way beyond that. Yeah.
Far beyond that.
He taught metalworking at Long Beach City
College, yes.
And so he arranged his schedule so that he could have our workout times free.
And when I interviewed Tom, you'll also hear he worked on the first erg, the first rowing machine, 4 years.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's an amazing.
No, that's a business story. A business story that we will get documented at some point in the future. Okay, let's see here. So you're back at Long Beach training for the Olympics. You're all in now. This is 72. There's competitions between 72 and 76. The Olympic trials for 76 were
in Long Beach.
In Long Beach, okay.
It was basically women's nationals.
Okay.
And the Olympic camp was chosen based upon your finish in the single.
Oh.
And the first, I believe it was the first 11 were taken for the camp. The top 11 for 76 were chosen for the camp. And I was fourth. And then we seat raced in the different boats.
Let me just interject here. In 68, and I don't know about 72, but the club or the school would race, and the winning club or school that won the 8 or the pair or whatever went at the Olympic trials, went to the Olympics. Somewhere around this time, they went to the camp system, whereby they just kind of qualified people to go to camp, and then they started placing them in boats.
Yeah,
Right.
based upon how well we each made the boats move.
So Long Beach Rowing Association women never got a chance to go to the Olympic trials and beat another group of, the Vesper or the Harvard women, and then that boat went to Long Beach. Long Beach women had to get into the camp and get placed in boats, correct?
Well, yeah. And in the years leading up to that, women from the East Coast, a lot of East Coast women, and women from all over the country came to Long Beach to train with Tom.
Ah, okay.
So the group swelled to quite a large number. And the competition at every workout, especially that last year, was very intense because everybody wanted to show Tom at every workout that they were going to give every last drop that they had. And so it became very, very competitive. And of course, Joan was first, so she became the single sculler, and then the rest of us, it was to be determined.
Sure.
And so we seat raced, and in the past, it had always been that when we went to European or World Championships, the fastest person was always in the single, then the next 2 fastest were in the double, and then the next 4 fastest were put in the quad. And so Tom got the idea, okay, well, let's switch it up a little bit, and we'll have our fastest person in the single, then we'll have our next 4 fastest in the quad, so that we have a higher chance of doing well in the quad.
Okay.
And as it turned out, unfortunately, a lot of the other countries who sent women did the same thing. So all of their best people were in the quads as well. But I was named to the team on Memorial Day, 1976, and that was pretty exciting.
That must have been a great team. Yes.
Yeah, I remember I rode my bike back to my apartment, and I didn't cry until I called my mom. I made the.
And now you're graduated, right?
Oh, yeah.
By 76, you graduated
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're working part-time?
I was 25.
Okay.
I had taught for a year, and then I took the last year off. I took 75, 76 off to train.
Okay.
I had gotten a hard-fought teaching job because teaching jobs then were very hard to come by, and quit it because I needed to train.
Train for rowing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so now you're in the quad with 3 other women, and they were from?
They were Lisa Hansen, who was originally from the Bay Area, Liz Hills, who was from back east, and me, and I can go
Carol?
get a picture. No, Carol was long gone. Oh, this is terrible. Edit this out.
Okay. 3. Actually, Hanson was in the Bay Area, but she's in the Long Beach Hall of Fame. You saw Hanson Stone? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she must have attended Long Beach also as a student.
Okay.
And I didn't even, the only reason when we were just down there 2 days ago, we saw her photo of her rowing a single co-cop.
Yeah, and her daughter was the Olympic sculler in the last Olympics.
Oh, is that right?
The single sculler.
Hanson?
Stone.
Oh, Stone, yeah.
Jebby Stone.
Okay. Wow.
So the 4 in the quad
Are
were
we running? Okay, sorry, okay.
Claudia Schneider, Liz Hills, Lisa Hansen, and myself. And Lisa had always been the stroke. And 3 weeks before the Olympics, when we were training in Dartmouth, in New Hampshire, Tom decided that I would stroke,
Okay.
which scared me absolutely to pieces. But Lisa was wonderful, and she helped me out and gave me pointers because I'd never stroked the quad before.
What when you would in the quad when you started off, how many strokes per minute? Let's back up. You're all I take it the East German women were big and heavy and
They were
huge.
They were all big.
Big. All right.
I was probably the smallest person at 5'9". I was probably the smallest.
Okay.
Of any of the Olympic rowers.
Did you try to compensate with a higher stroke per minute? I guess that's what.
You know, we just did what we did.
Okay, so there was no strategy. We're going to go out at
No.
40.
No.
Or 48.
You know, and I don't recall. I recall probably being around 36 during the body of the race, and then taking it up from there. But again, we only raced 1,000 meters.
1,000 meters. Okay.
So it was pretty much get up and go.
Right. And aerobic the whole way.
Yeah, and no looking back.
Okay.
We took it down just a tad for a couple hundred meters in the middle just to give us a little bit of a breather, and then we cranked it back up again. And it was a get up and go race.
When you were in the Olympics in that race, was it Tom McKibben flawless? Oars in and out, no get in the water?
Oh, it was flawless.
Okay.
It was flawless. There was. Now this doesn't show any technique, and
right.
we can put it on the camera in a minute. This is in our last 250 meters of our last race.
Good splash there. He liked that.
Backsplash.
Yeah, he liked.
Always have a good backsplash.
Right.
But you know, we don't know for sure, but looking back on those days, women were not tested for performance-enhancing drugs until 1984.
The term performance-enhancing drugs did not exist when we wrote.
No, we were tested for substances, for drugs, but things like steroids and stuff like that. We were not tested for. Nobody was tested for until, well, the women were not tested for until 1984. So back in 76 and before that, and the Eastern Bloc countries were just so dominant in the sport.
Right.
The Romanians, the Russians, the East Germans were just tremendous. And they did have big, thick necks and
Bulky muscles.
and very
right.
bulky muscles. Although the East German single sculler was 6'2", long-legged, and just flat gorgeous. Just a beautiful woman. But, and Joan almost caught her. I mean, if that
Right.
race had been 50 meters longer, Joan would have won.
won.
But I can remember in our heat, coming to the end of it, and Czechoslovakia just went, they just passed us
Yes.
by. And the way our repechage worked, teams that we had already beaten, Norway in particular, ended up in the grand final, and we ended up in the petit. And I can remember feeling that that was very unjust.
Sure.
Because we had never made a grand final. And our time indicated that we belonged there, and I remember feeling it was very unfair. But we decided, okay, well, we're not going to be in the grand final, but let's just kick it and make this our fastest race ever, so they will see that our time is worthy. And our time was actually 4th place time.
Wow.
It was the 4th fastest time by a half a second, and we weren't even pushed.
And this is in Montreal.
This is Montreal.
In the rowing venue was where in Montreal?
The rowing venue was on an island. We went back there for our 25th anniversary.
Okay.
And had a little reunion there. But the rowing and the canoeing and kayaking was all out there, specially made. It was on an island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, and it was lovely. It was really beautiful.
Did you have currents?
No.
So it
There
was
wasn't
all,
allowed.
okay.
It was no longer allowed. Yeah.
So you come home, before we got started, you mentioned one of the things at Long Beach when we all rode, it was you did it yourself. You silk screened your own shirts, you put gas in your car and drove to your own to the races that were local. There was, I believe, they collected money for the bus rides when we went to Oregon and raced up in Oregon and Washington and other longer for the long trips. But for San Diego and anything in Southern California, you paid your own way and got you there. You'd mentioned that on the U.S. team, you actually embroidered or knitted.
Oh yeah, we had nothing. We had no support whatsoever except from our families. And for most of this, my mom was a widow. My dad had passed away when I was 21. And so here's my mom who's by herself without an extra income. And I can remember her when the year we went to Moscow for World Championships. I remember her handing me a check for $800, which back then was like,
Sure.
gigantic. And she was there for me all the time. And I feel like one of those Olympic ads. Thank you, Mom. Because she was my biggest supporter and in all ways, emotionally and financially. But yeah, we bought all of our own stuff. We made up our own uniforms. We were the ones, the scullers, were the ones who insisted that we have leotards instead of bulky old T-shirts, because the scullers didn't want to have our thumbs caught in our shirts when we were rowing. And I can remember the East Coast girls not liking the idea of having to wear leotards, but now they all wear something like that, unisuits.
Dry fit unisuits.
Yeah. And so that was another way that we pioneered that we didn't even realize. It was just, well, this is logical for us to wear this because it's tight to the body. It's logical for the sport. You're not going to catch your thumbs in it. It's efficient and it's comfortable. And so that was another thing that we did. But yeah, I embroidered USA on all of our sweatshirts when we went to Worlds. The first year that Joan and I went back east to Old Lyme, Connecticut in '71, we had little matching outfits that we wore on the plane, little matching dresses, because back then, when
That's
you traveled,
true. You dressed up. That's correct, yes.
And I have a picture of it, and that's actually at Joan's house right now. But people thought we were stewardesses. But here we were. Oh, excuse me. Well,
flight attendants.
They were stewardesses then. But here we were. We always tried to look nice because so many female rowers would show up and they'd just, be in sloppy clothes and sweaty t-shirts and sweats and whatnot, and we wanted to set ourselves apart from that. So we made sure that we always had our hair fixed. Ribbons. We always raced with ribbons in our hair. We always had earrings. In fact, the reason I got my ears pierced was so that was for rowing.
Not as a teenager.
No. I was like 20. And there were things that we did that nobody else did. I'm thinking it was after Old Lyme, but it may have been a different one. It may have been after one of the Philadelphia races, nationals. I traveled with some of the guys from the Long Beach crew, Ed Arneson and Jolly Gazelle.
I rode with Ed and Jolly in the Nationals. And Randy Simmons in the Nationals in 1970. Four without.
Yeah.
I was in the bow steer. I was the one who steered it with the toe.
Yeah.
They still do that.
Tom and John were going to Syracuse to the Pan Am trials.
Okay.
And I could, so I went along with Ed Arneson, and he drove me up there. And
drove back with?
It was '71 because it was when I had the measles.
Okay.
But we went up to Syracuse to watch them race in the Pan Am trials, and while they were getting their boat ready, I was going around, and it was so beautiful and green, and there were wildflowers everywhere, and I picked little bunches of flowers, and I put it in their shoes. And Tom came back and said, "What's this?" And I said, "Well, this is for good luck." And after that, Tom always made sure that when we had a big race, we had flowers in our shoes. Huh. And in Montreal, he even arranged that they were little bunches of roses that were red roses that had white and blue ribbons. And they were in all of our shoes. And another little tradition that we always kept up.
So you drove back, you rode back with Ed and Jolly?
Jolly went with somebody else, I think maybe even Joan, and they hitchhiked someplace. But Ed and I went up north, and he stayed with some friends, and I stayed in a motel. And
did they trailer boats back? Did you trailer boats from the West Coast back also? Or? No,
I flew back.
Oh, you flew back. Oh, I see.
I ended up flying
You
home
flew back and then...
From Syracuse.
Okay. But to get to Syracuse...
We drove.
You drove. And you weren't pulling a trailer with shells?
I don't think so.
Okay. There was no Long Beach State crew, women's crew at that time.
No.
There was not a women's 8 or a women's 4 or any
collegiate competition. It may have developed sometime before '76, and I wouldn't stake my life and reputation on it. I would think Joan would have known that, or would know that more than I. I don't remember it. I was pretty focused on what we were doing, and there may have started to be women around. But I left Long Beach shortly after 1976. I had decided that I had spent 7 years of my life doing this, and I was ready to move on and be a grown-up and not train anymore. And then I got the job offer up here, and Brad and I got married, and so we moved to Bishop, far away from rowing, and I didn't even think about it until 3 years ago, 3 years ago. As I was getting ready to turn 60 and I was approaching my retirement, I was sort of waxing nostalgic, and I was at the boathouse and just kind of looking, and I hadn't been able to get a hold of Joan to arrange a row, and Debbie Nowinski came out, and Debbie was a person who started rowing with us the last year that we were training in 1976. She was quite a bit younger, and she came out and said, "Karen, oh my gosh," and I was just in street clothes, but she said, "Oh, they bend, come on, let's go out in a double." And so we went out in a double, and we went around the island, and it felt so delicious that I decided to get back into it.
Were you able to get in the double and pull the oars up off the water and just sit there solid after all these years?
Pretty close.
Or did the boat fly?
Well, in a double, you've got somebody else helping you.
Right.
Once I got my single, it took me a while to get my technique back, and I'm still working on it. But in the double, you have somebody else to help balance you.
When you were coached by McKibben, one of the drills, as soon as you got off the dock, was all the oars went up, and the boat was solid. The oars were equidistant apart, and they were equal off the water, and that boat just sat there. Just an aside, I put together a 16-over boat last year, and we went off the dock, and it went flop, 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 and did that for quite some time. I missed that feeling.
Yeah. One of our workouts with Tom was to just be sitting still.
Right.
You have your oars, pick them up out of the water cleanly, move them back to the catch position, place them in the water, pick them back up, move them back to the finish position, put them in the water, pick them up, go back. And we did that for hours. We did that until our behinds were falling off. And he would finally, at the end of it, he would say, "Okay, now, when we can have every single one of you," and there might be 5 or 6 of us, every single one of you doing it together, and nobody touches the water for 10 strokes, then we can go in. And we'd get to 9, and somebody would tap. Okay. And he would go, "All right, 1. And that's why we were good.
That's correct.
That's why we were good.
Not good, you were great. Exceptional. Exceptional. When I was starting to talk about the women's rowing along the state, it actually became official. The boathouse from day one was locker rooms were for men, the bathrooms were for men. There were no women rowers. And can you just go through a little bit about how that? So suddenly there's 5 or 6 women rowers that Tom McKibben, Long Beach State students who Tom McKibben is training, and in a boathouse that has no facilities no showers for women.
And if the men were busy taking their showers and getting ready to go, if we were lucky, the restroom at the end of the parking lot might be open.
Ah, yes, the public restroom.
The public restroom. But otherwise, we just had to wait until they were done, and then we'd get somebody to stand guard, and we'd go into the men's restroom. Was
nothing worked out before '76? Was this? I was gone by '72, '74 full time. Was nothing worked out at all? So you had to come dressed, ready to row.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Put on sweats afterwards and drive home and shower.
Or ride your bike.
Ride your bike
yeah,
or whatever.
It was usually riding a bike.
Right.
Because that was part of our training.
Okay.
We all got bikes and we were riding like crazy and running like crazy and doing everything we could. Everything we did, we'd always take the stairs. We'd never take elevators.
Right.
Everything we did was for training.
The bike, I can remember in the late 60s, Tom and Kevin talking about bike racing. I know he did it, and when I interviewed him, I will bring that up. And in addition to rowing, he actually got into races, bicycle races, with breaking away type bicycle races.
It's the same kind of
motion. Same motion, yeah, with the legs.
Same muscle groups.
All right. Well, did your mother go to Montreal? Did she make the
Yes,
trip?
my mother and my sister made the trip.
Made the trip. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well rewarded.
And they still talk about it as my mom's now 96 and doing very well, and for which I'm very grateful. And they still, with all this resurgence of memories and whatnot that are coming about, the documentary that's being made about Joan and me, and this, we've brought out the old pictures, and my mom and my sister have talked a lot about how special that was to be there, and how wonderful it was to be in a place where everybody was speaking different languages, and they could be countries that were totally at war, but it was a place where everybody was happy. And you could root for your own country, but it was okay if somebody else won because they were the best, and you appreciated that. And it was a magical feeling, a magical place to be. And I look at the athletes now and I wonder, being sponsored, having that being their job, having it be so, I won't say so easy for them because I know that they're training really, really hard, but not having to worry about how am I going to get my rent paid? Are my parents going to be able to help afford to support me? Okay, they can't. I can't train anymore. I'm done.
Well, there's no sponsorships
No
afterwards.
sponsorships, nothing. And I wonder if they appreciate it as much as we did.
Don't know.
I don't know, and I never will. I was on a panel with a group of other Olympians 3 or 4 years ago as part of a community reads program. And they were doing a book about a woman who almost made the Olympics, Jill Kinmont Booth, who was a skier and became a quadriplegic from a ski accident. And there are 2 books and 2 movies that were made about her life. And so there was this panel, and they were all sponsored athletes, and then there was me. And I kept saying, I hope you guys appreciate what you have. We were outfitted by Montgomery Ward, not Nike or Polo or Yves Saint Laurent or whoever.
Right. Outstanding.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a magical, your Olympics was magical, and this has been a magical interview.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And I hope to see you at Lake Tahoe rowing, and I hope to see you down at the boathouse.
Yeah, well, you'll